Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you what is JSON, why do we use JSON, and how we can create a JSON data. So let's get started. So first of all, what is JSON? Now the name JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. But despite the name which contains JavaScript, JSON is mostly language independent and it is specified in the terms of object as name value pairs. Now that's okay, but what really is JSON, you may ask, right? So a JSON is a way of structuring data and it's essentially a data format. So JSON is a data format, same as some kind of text formats, for example XML or any other text format. JSON is also a data text format, right? Now why this JSON is really popular and how it's useful. Now first of all, let me make it clear that JSON can be used in most of the programming language. If you want to use JSON in C++, Java, JavaScript, Python or any other language, most probably the support for JSON will be present, or any such library will be there in order to parse JSON or in order to create JSONs, right? So JSON is really language independent, and most of the languages you will find libraries or parsers to support it, right? So as we have said that the JSON is a data format, so how we can use JSON, or how JSON is used. So let me give you an example. So for example, you have a browser and you want to get some information about the temperature in some particular city, right? So the browser has to make this request to a server which makes this data available to the browser or a client once again. Now there are some ways of sending this data from the client to the server, right? So you can say the most simplest way is to send a string format, right? And the server is going to get this string and then it's going to give you the result. But it's not so easy, right? Until and unless you have some data predefined format, it's hard for the server to understand in which format this data is coming. And that's where the JSON comes in. So this JSON is a data format. So your server knows that whatever client is sending to the server is in the JSON format. So on the server side, for example, whatever language you are using, in that language, you can use a JSON parser in order to get this data or interpret this data, and then according to the request you can just prepare this data in the form of JSON once again and send it to the client. And then whatever client side language you are using, most probably you will be using JavaScript, and this JavaScript will be able to understand that this data is in the JSON format. So it's going to parse this data and then it's going to show you this data in the form of HTML using that JavaScript, right? So this is very simple kind of JSON, right? So a JSON has these curly brackets and then the values are defined like this. So there is a key and the value for it. So key here is a city and the value of a city is Paris, for example, right? Unit is a key, and C, capital C, which stands for centigrade, is the value of unit, right? In the same way, once your server has some data, it's going to send it in this format. So here low means low temperature, and so low is a key and 16 here is the value, right? High is the key and 23 is the value, right? So this is the format of very simple JSON, which can be sent from the client to the server and then server to the client. So JSON is essentially a data format. Now the question arises that which kind of data you can send using JSON, right? So let's see what are the values you can use to send data. So in JSON, you can send this data in the form of these data type which are there in this picture. So the key, which I already explained you, for example, city was the key, and it's always in the string format, right? So key will be in string format, and the JSON value, you can see the JSON value can be an object, it can be an array, it can be a number. Number means it can be an integer or a decimal value, and string is a string, and other three formats are true, false for Boolean. And if you don't have any data, you can send null. Okay, so these are the data types which can be used to send the values in JSON. So it can be object, array, number, or a string, or a Boolean value. Or if you don't have any data, then you can send null also. Okay, now let me show you a simple example of a JSON. Now for example, you want to send employee data or the data of some person from a client to a server, right? So for example, the first name is John here, so its value is a string value, right? Last name is Smith, it's also a string value, this value you can see. Now age is 25, this is a number, right? So there is no double quotation around it. Okay, so number you can write directly like this. Now address can be a little bit complex because the address may contain a street and the city name and the state name, for example, and the zip code, right? So this data you can send in the form of object. And what is an object? So an object is also a combination of key value pair, and you can see using this curly bracket you can define key value pairs, and because it's in these curly bracket it becomes an object of address, right? So an object is nothing but the key value pairs itself, the combination of these key value pairs, and they are created using these curly brackets. So this whole is a object. The combination of street, city, state, and zip is an object, right? Now let's come to the phone numbers, right? So a person can have multiple phone numbers, okay, and you can define these phone number in the form of array. So you can see a square bracket here, and inside a square bracket you have defined two objects. First object have a type home and number, whatever number is, right? Second object has type fax and the number, whatever number is, right? So you are defining multiple object for the phone number, and you can do this using this kind of array. So you are essentially creating an array of object in this case. Now let's see how we can create a JSON. So I have this text editor, this is Visual Studio Code, but you can use any text editor to create a JSON file. It's not essential that you need to use this kind of editor. You can use any other editor to create a JSON file. Okay, so to create a JSON file you just need to, for example, give a name to your JSON file, for example sample, and then you just add the extension JSON after dots here. So sample.json, and it's going to create a JSON file. Now a JSON will start with these curly brackets, right? Now let's take an example of same employee data, and that employee data contains, for example, name. So we will define a key name here. So this is called key. Name is the key, and the value of this key is, for example, the name itself. So for example, Mark is the name. Okay, and this key is always a string, as I already told you, and you use double quotation to use strings in JSON. Now the key and the value are separated by this colon. Okay, so this is a key, this is a value. Because it's a string, so we have included, or we have added double quotation around it, and the key and value are separated by this colon, right? Now if you want to add more data, you use this comma. Okay, and this comma means you want to add some more data. So for example, I want to add surname here, and then I want to just give this colon to separate key and value, and then some surname. Okay, so for example, some surname. Okay, and then I want to add some more data, and I add, for example, age here, and this time, because age is a number, I can use directly a number notation here. Now this number can be a decimal value also. So for example, a person is 26 years and 6 months, you can just give 26.5 here, and it's perfectly fine. It can take an integer or a decimal value here. Okay, now for address, so let's define a address here. So address, because address can contain multiple key value pairs, so we can define this address inside an object. An object is a combination of key value pair inside these curly brackets. So once you give these curly bracket, this value becomes an object, and here you can once again give these key value pairs. So for example, address contains street here, so you can just give the street, and then the value of street, some value, right? And then next comes for example, the city name, so you can just give the city name. This is also most probably string in most of the cases, and then you can give the zip code, right? So zip, and in some cases it can be a number, in some other countries it can be some string format, right? So let's say it's a number, so you can just give this number like this. Now keep in mind that I haven't added comma in the last element, right? So I have added comma here, I have added comma here, but because zip is my last element of this address object, so the last element doesn't contain any comma. So when I add comma, it's an error, right? So I don't need to add comma to the last element of an object, right? So you can say this is a big object, this is one object, and then address contains the sub object here. Okay, now let's add the phone numbers here. So for adding the phone number, you need to add comma here after this curly bracket, right? Because you are adding one more element here. So let's add a phone, for example, here, and then these phone number, for example, a person can have multiple phone numbers, right? So in order to give the phone number, you can directly define an array. Array means multiple values for the same key. Okay, so for example, a person contain the first number, and then a person contain the second phone number, and a person can contain the third phone number, and it can contain multiple element in the array. So you can have multiple elements in this array, and these array values are also separated by these comma, and the last value does not have the comma. Now one special quality about this array is it doesn't have any key here, right? The key is the phone, and because the phone have multiple values, we have used the array using this square bracket, and the value are multiple, so they are separated by this comma. So your value does not have any key here. The key is phone here, and there are 3 values in the form of array. And how you recognize array? You can recognize array because you have used square brackets here. So these are the most basic data types here. Okay, you can use also, for example, if the person is married or not, so single here, and the value I can provide, for example, false here if he is not a single, and if the person is single, we can just define true here. Okay, so you can define value as a boolean value, and then a person can have some skills, right? So I can just write skill, and for example, for now he don't want to add any skill, so he can add this null value here. So if you don't want to give any value with the key, you can define null, and it will be considered as no value or null. Okay, so this is no value. So this is a simple JSON. Here as values, you can use strings as we have used here, name and surname, and then you can use numbers. It can be decimal numbers or integers. You can use object, so you have this object under these curly brackets. You can use array in these square brackets, multiple values for the same key, and then you can use true or false as a boolean value for some key, or you can use null if you don't have any data for that key. So this is how a simple JSON is defined. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please rate, comment, and subscribe, and bye for now.